All right. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Can you hear me better now? That's great. Okay. So, this very little diversity in food has many consequences for biodiversity and the environment, such as increasing the homogeneity of food landscapes and reducing the variety of crops and animal species that are used for food and production globally. And also, there are negative consequences for nutrition, including micronutrient deficiencies and a rising prevalence of malnutrition and obesity. So today's masterclass aims to shine a light on the linkages between biodiversity, nutrition, by diving into Indigenous peoples' food and knowledge systems. And more specifically, we're going to highlight the vital role of Indigenous knowledge in protecting and promoting biodiversity to improve nutrition, showcasing how traditional practices and innovations can address global nutritional challenges effectively. So, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers for today. So we have Lisa Nelly Tamtam, founder of the Nabanga Society Vanuatu in Oceania, Daryl Kudenai, Global Indigenous Youth Focal Point from North America, and Sara Elvira, President of the Sami Youth Organization Saminoroa and Vice Chair of the World Reindeer Herders from Sami, Sweden. So after listening to our speakers' backgrounds, we're going to hear about their experiences, the challenges that they are facing along with their communities, the actions that they're taking to preserve their systems, and the opportunities that they see for the future. We're then going to have some time for a Q&A session, giving you the opportunity to engage directly with our speakers. And for online participants, you also have the possibility to participate to that. Just write your questions in the chat and you will be included. So without any further ado, over to you. All right, Sara.
Yeah, my name is Sara Elvira Kofmanen, and I belong to the Sami people. And we are people that live in Sami, the area of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and a part of Russia, so the Arctic area. Shortly about reindeer herding. Reindeer herding we have all over the Arctic area. It is in 10 national states. We are 24 different indigenous peoples working with reindeers, and it's nomadic. And we follow the reindeer that move in a pattern every year, and we follow them and the nature. And like you see in the picture, we are living in a very marginalized area where it's actually very difficult to live, but the reindeer can live here. That has made it possible for us to be living in areas like this with the cold Arctic. But it is also a very sensitive area for changes, especially for now with the climate changes and the exploitations that are happening there with in the name of the green transition. And the next picture is we were supposed to have a picture of our favorite food from our area. And my favorite food is biodiversity. And what you see in the picture is the fat around the reindeer's stomach. So I didn't have a picture of it when it's like cooked and done. So this biodiversity is when you take this fat and put is it called minced reindeer meat when it's but reindeer meat inside, and then you smoke this this meat and also salt it, and that's one of my absolutely most favorite food when it comes to our food. And I think we also serve this in, if you haven't seen the indigenous tents, the labos outside, so you can come and taste that during lunch or dinner.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Next up, we have Daryl. Daryl, please.
Ambo stitch dagunchawa tatankawa gichiwa cha toganaka itancha me and Gibi ambane nina washde me chande washde. Good day, my relatives. I introduce myself in my traditional Iarhe Nakota language from the Rocky Mountains in southern Alberta, part of the Iarhe Nakota people. I'm also half Navajo, Dene on my dad's side from New Mexico. But My name in my language translates into English as dancing buffalo, and Wacha Toganaka Itansha means the one that leads with his heart. As you can see in the photo, this is a mountain that's not far from my home. I am a part of the mountain people where we say the mountains are sacred places. These mountains are home for me, and a lot of our history of my community's connection to the mountains is that we were big game hunters and gatherers. And so we were very unique. The English word for our community was called Stony. And we only were referred to that because we knew the mountains very strongly. The next photo there is a photo of a food that in our language, we call wachutha. And wachutha means dried meat. And you can dry any meat. We have buffalo, elk, moose, deer. And to me, the dry meat is a very significant food. It's one of the foods that we use to preserve that would allow us to store for long periods of time. And this was a source of food security. I really love it because it serves as the basis for many other foods that it could be used in and many other names. And so I'll stop there and pass it over to our next speaker here, Lisa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa, and I proudly represent the Tam Tam tribe from the beautiful islands of Pentecost in Vanuatu. As a descendant of the High Chief and custodian of our traditional land, specifically Panmatmat and Ranputo, I pay my deepest respect to my ancestors and my elders. Vanuatu boasts a rich tropical ecosystem teeming with diverse biodiversity. Our islands are blessed with lush rainforest, vibrant coral reefs, and fertile volcanic soils. So as an Indigenous advocate, I am passionate about preserving our traditional ways, including language, food systems, and cultural practices. Our ecosystem is linked to our identity, holding stories and connection that have sustained us for generations. So yeah, as you can see in the picture, so this is how our people back in the islands live. We live out from just push material, so it's friendly ecosystem. Yeah, and also this is our traditional food. So we have diverse of tropical food, and this is one of my favorite traditional food called nefus. So nefus we call nefus banana in my language, and so it's with coconut wrap and cooked with coconut cream, and yeah, so I think that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentations. And I'm sure that we're all very curious now that we've heard about your backgrounds to hear about the experiences, challenges, and actions that you're undertaking. So that's what we're going to be discussing now. Thank you again for presenting. First up, we are going to discuss the knowledge that, as we mentioned, is eroding and fading away. Is that something that you perceive? And what are the challenges that come with it? And how does this impact biodiversity and nutrition in your communities? So first, Sara Elvira, I'm going to start with you and ask you, you're involved in the preservation of Indigenous traditional practices, such as the one you mentioned, reindeer husbandry. Do you see this erosion and this fading we just mentioned happening in reindeer husbandry?
Yes, like the reindeer herding husbandry, or the reindeer husbandry is, or if I say it like this, indigenous reindeer herders' adoption to new like hazards in the Arctic, such as loss of pasture lands, is of course worst of the changing climate. And traditional ways of life, well-being, and food security are a challenge for us, which makes us worry about the future of indigenous peoples and indigenous youth when it comes to our like knowledge system, because we are living very close to the nature, like other indigenous peoples, and see that when the nature is affected, our like history books and knowledge is also getting affected in a negative way. And I am concerned that the food culture of indigenous reindeer herding people will be strongly affected of that when traditional sources of food for us, like reindeer herding, fishing, hunting, and gathering birds and other sources have, are being affected negatively. So what we see in the Arctic is that that it is a very highly sensitive area to disruptions, and we are directly affected by climate change with the melting glaciers, warmer waters that causes the Arctic. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Char, the fish, to disappear, loss of the reindeer's traditional migration paths. And then also with the weather that it can suddenly be raining in December when it's going to be full winter. So this is a challenge that we see is like happening in the reindeer husbandry right now.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to take the chance to move on to Daryl from that and ask you about the food security and sovereignty program that you've recently started running, where both traditional and contemporary practices are utilized since we're discussing the erosion. Well, what challenges do you see for food security and nutrition in this program that you started, and what role does biodiversity play?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really enjoy this question primarily because this idea of using both traditional and contemporary knowledge practices to me are key in today's pursuing of a better future for our next generations. I think for myself, the challenge that we see a lot is that indigenous knowledge is very sacred. And oftentimes there are different levels of communities healing practices in terms of residential schools within Canada. Where we feel a protectiveness over indigenous knowledge and not necessarily ready to share. Although there are many communities across Canada and the US as well that have are been in a further process of healing that are in a place of sharing. And then the other challenge that Western practices would often take indigenous knowledge, and we would look at that as extraction without prior free and informed consent. And so there's a challenge there that we're still exploring in how we can respectably utilize both knowledges. And so in these programs, we bring young people, both indigenous and non-indigenous, to sit together and talk about these things, and really just to create the space to have those conversations, to allow respect and respectful dialogues to happen. And to me, that's very simple, but also is very effective because there's a sense of trust that's built, and then a sense of sharing, and then solutions will start to arise. A lot of the times as well within indigenous communities, we have what we call wise practices. Best practices are the practices that you would use to any community. Indigenous communities are very different, and we are different because of the land and the territory that we live on. Therefore, the way we interact is different processes, and we utilize those processes. And sometimes our work and contemporary practices interfere with each other. For example, the Canada parks. The Canada parks are preserving and protecting a national territory, while at the same time that meant removing the indigenous peoples, when we are the original custodians that know the biodiversity, that know the nutritional needs of how that could look through our communities. And so we are still in a process of trying to get back to those places and allow for that connection to those places. And so biodiversity and nutrition for us is very key in that situation in terms of indigenous rights, and especially to being access and having access to land. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Daryl. And this was not only interesting, but also very useful because you mentioned young people, and that is a fundamental part of knowledge transmission. And that allows me to jump to Lisa, and ask you, Lisa, you're a strong advocate for the preservation of ancestral knowledge and indigenous languages, so communicating, and how it relates to the indigenous food systems in Vanuatu. So I would like to ask you, what threats are indigenous knowledge and languages facing, and how do these risks affect the preservation of biodiversity and nutrition in your area?
Okay, thank you for your question. And Thank you for also recognizing my passion for preserving ancestral knowledge and Indigenous people's language, Indigenous language in Vanuatu. I'm speaking from my experience living with the land, ocean, and waters. I've seen how traditional languages and ancestral knowledge have faced numerous threats. We have 82 little islands in Vanuatu. So Vanuatu is situated between Australia and Fiji. So we have 82 little islands, and in the 82 islands, we have over 130 languages, traditional languages. And so the threats that we're facing is shifting towards languages, shifting towards dominant language. So for this reason, why people moving, shifting the language, the focus to dominant languages is because they're moving to towns or to the city. And so when they move into towns, their children learn English or French. And so that impacts our traditional language. It is left behind. And also another reason or another impact or threat is climate change. So we are facing climate change impacts on ancestral lands and resources. Vanuatu is prone to catastrophic cyclone. Just last year, we faced 2 Category 5 cyclones just in 3 days. And so this really have an impact on our traditional, our resources, our biodiversity, our ecosystem. And so people also moving out from the, inward into the land because of sea level rise. So we're also experiencing sea level rise. So so climate change destroys vegetation and land and water sources. Another threat that I've observed is cultural erosion due to urbanization and modernization, where people think that, oh no, my traditional, because of the mindset now that we're facing, they think like, no, traditional way of living is sort of like a low standard way of living. And so like, I'm not gonna be ashamed to tell that. So people, why they want to move to towns, to cities, is because they want to adopt this westernized life. And so this really impacts the language. And also when leaving our traditional land, we're with the impacts that we're facing, it's like taking our concentration away from our traditional ways, our culture, and our languages. So that is some of the threats that I'm observing and I'm seeing, and that's why I'm advocating for this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to the 3 of you for explaining some of the challenges and threats that you are seeing in your communities. And can we appreciate not only that we're talking about biodiversity, but how diverse your backgrounds are? I think it's really fascinating, and it really brings a lot to this event that we're having. So now that we've addressed the challenges, I'd really like to go over, on a more positive note, on the concrete actions that are being undertaken by you and your communities. So to safeguard Indigenous people food and knowledge systems, as well as biodiversity and nutrition. So Daryl, I'm going to start with you and ask you a bit more related to your background. So hunting and harvesting are 2 important examples of how biodiversity is harnessed to provide Indigenous peoples with diverse food and support their nutrition. And you are a hunter yourself and are currently working on a project to reconnect Indigenous communities to traditional hunting and harvesting territories. Can you tell us a bit more about how these activities improve nutrition and biodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first off that, continuing from my last answer, there's this idea that our people's identity are rooted within the land, and ultimately knew all of the systems to understand that that land very well, and that enforced our food preferences. For our community today, we see a lot of suffering and health issues because our microbiome and our food preferences and the food that we consume today are not traditional foods that we consumed since millennia. Therefore, we see these health risks. And so now we are looking at the traditional foods that are embedded within our values and beliefs, that support our nutritional needs. And how we seek those is by understanding the biodiversity. And this word biodiversity, even in itself, for us, we say mintoya debi, all my relations. It's how everything is connected. And when you understand these principles and values of Indigenous culture and identity, you're able to understand biodiversity, and that serves as a foundation. And food is just one of those things that helps facilitate that connection between us and the land. And then that even goes into ceremony, because we are a very gift and ceremonial people. So we exchanged foods a lot. And this also played a role in our microbiome. One of the things that we also see is that when you understand and you realize that you're reconnecting wildlife that are traditionally vegetation that are traditional to that land and to the people, the quality of life and the health of Indigenous peoples improve. And so it's not just consuming, it's also in the presence of. And this is why territories are important, because when we're in the presence of certain foods that we consume, that are nutritional, there's many nutritional benefits. We don't necessarily have to eat them all the time, because they serve an even greater purpose that helps our overall mental and well-being. For example, the buffalo were taken from our people, and we're going through genocide, much like our people in Canada and North America. And they went almost extinct, much like the Indigenous peoples. Now there's a resurgence of the Buffalo Treaty, where many Indigenous peoples and communities now are starting to farm buffalo and bringing them back into their community. It's not that it's there as a consumption, but it's more or less the spirit of the buffalo. When it's present in your community, we naturally see the community doing well. And that's just because it's a keystone animal. It serves purpose not only through biodiversity and nutrition, but also through spiritual and physical well-being. And that's why biodiversity is so important in these projects that we use as a foundation to teach and to share and bridge together contemporary and Western and traditional knowledge. So I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daryl, also for bringing in that health aspect, because biodiversity and nutrition is health in the end. So the microbiome plays a super important role in it. So thank you. Lisa, I'm going to jump to you. And since we talked about ancestral knowledge, I know that you work in several initiatives for intergenerational dialogue. So working both with youth and the elderly, as we mentioned. Can you give us some examples of successful initiatives and activities that addressed intergenerational dialogue for better nutrition and biodiversity preservation more specifically?
Thank you for your question. Through my Napanka Society platform, I've been working on initiatives that bring together our community, especially with youths, elders, to preserve our Indigenous knowledge and promote sustainable living. But recently I've just started my journey, which was the beginning of last year. But I've been able to build relationship with elders in our communities, and also some local NGOs, communities, and that helps to boost my work as an advocate in Napanka Society. And at the moment, I am working in partnership with Robert, who is the founder of the Pacific Food Revolution. And yesterday he cooks a lunch at the Nomads tent. So yeah. So I'm excited for that, contributing to the Regenerative Vanua book. And so I've been doing a lot of advocacy work, which I saw a huge difference, how it impacts youth to really take preservation of our languages, culture, food systems, and food security seriously. And right now I am super excited because I've just recently started my Napanka Society, but I am super excited about our upcoming Taro Festival in South Pentecost. So it's a collaboration with the youths in my communities where we will stand together and work to involving schools and elders and youths and mothers to share our taro varieties and also sing traditional songs. So we'll collect traditional songs and recite poems about taro, the history, and also document our languages, the taro names for taro variety, and also showcasing how to plant, starting from planting and then onwards to cooking in the kitchen and then using the waste material. So we're going to do that. And also the important initiative too about this Taro Festival is adapting into climate change. So we will have this Taro Festival mainly to target how we can adapt our planting ways to suit climate change, to adapt into climate change, because climate change at the moment is affecting our taro varieties. And so, so that is one of the important initiatives that I'm working on at the moment. And so we'll document the festival and publish books on taro stories, plus record traditional languages, labels for taro varieties. And also as a young girl, I've faced challenges, but they only motivated me more. That the Taro Festival is all about keeping our Indigenous traditional traditions alive, promoting sustainable practices and empowering our community. And we're still searching for funding, but I know it will come. This festival is a great example of intergenerational dialogue in action, ensuring our Indigenous knowledge and sustainable practices continue for future generations.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This festival seems amazing, and I love how it's a full circle, going from planting to managing food waste and putting all of the generations together. So amazing. Sara, Elvira, can you give us some examples, similarly to Lisa, of successful initiatives undertaken for your project, which is on Indigenous people, youth, and resilience, so a slightly different topic, in the face of the food and climate crisis that leverage the linkages between biodiversity and nutrition?
I will focus on the work we have been doing in the World Reindeer Herders. We have had a project called ELLO project, focusing on documenting food knowledge systems. And then we had Indigenous youth from the Arctic area writing a book and explaining about their favorite food from their culture. And they have been writing about this and in one way, like thinking about their culture, what kind of knowledge do they have? They have been going home and asked their elders about this traditional knowledge. So this has been an opportunity for the youth to start to think about this and ask at home and try to learn more and wanting to learn more about the food knowledge. Because today we live in a world where it's very easy to access this like ultra processed food, and it is everywhere and very easy to just go to the store and grab that and maybe not think about what am I actually eating and how does that make me like feel in a way. So it has been a very good opportunity to make youth learn more about their culture and see how rich culture and food systems they actually have and what kind of quality we have on the food. And the next thing we also have had is this food lab that many of you maybe have seen outside the Indigenous tents. So here in the food lab, it has been an opportunity for Indigenous youth to focus on innovative ways of lifting up the food systems and maybe combining more with the like modern world. And also a place to discuss the challenges we have when it comes to our culture, identity, and the climate, of course, and engaging Indigenous youth to be more engaged in these kind of issues.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you so much, Sarelvira. And I like that you mentioned the aspect of ultra processed foods, because that's definitely something that's an issue for everyone, and even more in indigenous people food systems where you have to preserve a culture and a tradition.
Yeah, and also that it also affects your like mental health and your health. How, yeah,
Definitely. Yeah. As Daryl was saying, health is a
Yes.
crucial part of this nexus.
Mm.
So thank you for talking about the actions that are being undertaken to preserve indigenous people's food and knowledge systems. And before giving the floor to the audience for the Q&A, I would like to close our discussion by asking you one last question about the future. So what are some opportunities for people to support? What are some areas to strengthen and future steps that can be taken? So I'm going to start with you since you already have the mic in your hands. And so what are some areas that you think need to be strengthened to support the linkage between biodiversity, nutrition, and indigenous people's food and knowledge systems in your region?
in my region, I'm from the Swedish part of Sápmi, so I'm going to focus a bit on Sweden. Then we have the politicians. They have to focus on our rights, the indigenous rights, and on something called FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent that you also mentioned a bit about. And because when our lands and water aren't being respected, then yeah, our culture is not like being able to exist anymore, and with that, we lose our yeah, who we are, the culture, the languages, and our food system, and also the rangers. So in Sweden, they have to focus more on involving indigenous peoples in yeah, and everywhere when it comes to our culture and our issues.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. I hope you're all listening and to ways that we can all engage. And Lisa, I'm going to jump to you now. And I'm going to ask you about the fact that many people would indeed like to get involved and know how they can support knowledge preservation, as well as nutrition and biodiversity. And since you advocate and promote these topics, what are some opportunities? I mean, you mentioned the festival, for example, that people can undertake to support these preservation initiatives?
Okay, thank you for your question. Thank you for asking. I'm excited to share ways. So one of the ways that you can get involved is volunteer, get involved. So assist community-led conservation projects, help organize cultural events and festivals, and also support financially. So donate to organizations preserving indigenous language and knowledge, fund community-led conservation initiatives, contribute to indigenous-led research projects, and also be an ally. Share indigenous stories, achievements on social media, also participate in campaigns supporting indigenous rights, and educate your networks about indigenous issues, and also collaborate. Partner with indigenous organizations on projects, support indigenous-led business and social entrepreneurs, also work with indigenous experts in research, education, conservation, and also learn and grow. Read books about indigenous culture, and also attend workshop webinars, listen to indigenous voices, and advocate for change. And because remember, like together we can promote agricultural diversity, ensure sustainable food systems is secured for future generation, and also protecting the indigenous rights. So I think these are some ways that we can all get involved in promoting our sector.
Thank you, Lisa. That was very straightforward, very helpful ways in which everyone can engage. So thank you. Daryl, it's been really great to see what you've been doing so far and everything you've shared. Looking ahead, what would you identify as the next steps to increase the protection of biodiversity and improve nutrition in indigenous people's food systems and your region?
I think there's definitely what we heard from my co-panelists here. But the way I could explain it is there's three levels: international, national, and local. And that's really important for the local community because a lot of the information that we're sharing this week and with Indigenous, non-Indigenous doesn't make it to the local community. Last year, the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus had the Global Indigenous Youth Forum here in Rome, and we're having it again next year. That's one way that you can support us by partnering with us and attending and spreading awareness of this gathering. And My Food Vision is our campaign that you can see online on our website. By having this gathering, we brought over 200 Indigenous youth from around the world. And together we identified and created this declaration. And within North America, within my region, we identified three things that stuck out the most. And one of them, to me, that really hit home was that there's no place to learn about Indigenous food sovereignty or security within North America. So with my job back home as an executive director with the Howl Experience, we created our first ever program where we brought together both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth to have a type of training and awareness. And that's what we have done. So that is about creating space and dialogue at a community level that you all could do in your own regions, in your own community. And lastly, just like Lisa said, that learning and taking that learning upon yourself is so crucial. At the end of the day, I say reaching out to your local Indigenous community, learning about their values and beliefs is something that we could all do better. And so within my community and my region, I believe something that will really help is to bridge the gap from local and international. And I think that's something that my work is doing and that I'm really excited to see and continue to work on because it is definitely needed. And that's not happening a lot for Indigenous communities today.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daryl. And so with that, we close our discussion phase, which was very rich. So we can open the floor to everyone now. Thank you. And yes, time for the questions and answers. So we heard a lot about the challenges, actions, and opportunities, and these very diverse backgrounds. So I hope there's questions coming from the audience because I'm sure everyone has many. And please go ahead. We're going to do this by hand raising, or if anyone is online and has questions in the chat, please kindly let us know from the technical point of view. So yes, all right, without any further ado, please go ahead. Is it possible to get up? Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. First, thank you all very much. That was really interesting, and it's probably the highlight of my week here is learning about all of these things. So I'm Sinead Moles, and I'm working with a division of the Department of Agriculture in Ireland, and we work globally. And one of the projects we're working on is in Zambia. And my question to you is one where I'm looking for your advice, for your insights and experience. One of the things we're trying to do is partially to bridge this gap between international and local by looking at how we can integrate into the national policy-making processes all of the Indigenous knowledge and practices that exist. So one, I'm concerned that it's going to be extractive for a start. And so how do we avoid that? But also, we're coming in as outsiders, so we're not the right people to do it, but here we are, we're doing it. So hopefully, you know, we can move it forward in a way that it stays in Zambia and is led by a Zambian institution. But in the meantime, what would you say are pathways and practical sources of knowledge to integrate into the policymaking process to give the policymakers a portfolio of options beyond just the contemporary scientific solutions to integrate that as potential solutions for food and nutrition security or for food systems, sustainable food systems more broadly. So that's my main question. And if I could just ask one more specifically to Daryl, sorry, just it's a little quick one, thank you. Did I hear you correctly when you said that in your language, biodiversity translates to all my relations? It's very nice, thank you. That's it.
All right, so whoever wants to respond to that, go ahead.
One of the things I also do is I'm a faculty member for the University of Calgary and Banff Center for Indigenous Leadership. And to me, I relate that question to a lot of our reconciliation efforts. And to me, it's all about building right relations, and that takes time to be exploratory within program making. And that takes a lot of content information downloading, but also a lot of in-person visiting with community. So this community that you're working with, I would, if as a facilitator, I would look at them as someone who could host a portion of a program where these policymakers can go into and interact and learn from them and understand their perspective as a local Indigenous community. And really, it's just about creating that space for them to interact and understand their values and beliefs, because that is very foundational to that saying, all my relations. And so that's one way to look at it. At the national level, there's lots of Indigenous communities in North America. I can't speak for where you are at, but some of them are very good to work with, some of them not so much. And that's why it's so important to interact with their local community, because they will tell you which one. And that's a wise practice for us. A best practice is you're finding someone that's not going to quite work, even though they're Indigenous. It's the people you're working with that will define who they want to work with, and that's building a right relation. And you just facilitate that, because they are, to me, your main priority. They're the ones that are going to improve overall quality of the program and outcome of what you're pursuing. And to me, they're the main vein of the program and process. And so you got to nourish it. You got to put time into it and really just understand the Indigenous community that you're working with. And that's why I call them exploratory programs, because you can be very creative in how you can create a 2-day, 10-day, 4-month-long program where there's this cultural exchange, there's this information exchange and deepening relationship. So I'll stop there. Hope that helps. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Daryl, for answering the question. And first, I would like to see if Lisa or Sara Elvira want to follow up on that in any way, because I saw there was a lot of nodding and handwriting. So maybe you want to add something.
What Daryl said, that you have to be there and really connect with people and get to understand the traditions and their beliefs, and also interact fairly with the community.
Perfect. Thank you. So please go ahead.
What a broad question it was. Can you repeat the question? Mm.
Sorry, just one recommendation coming from online. Please use the mic when you ask questions, because otherwise they can't hear online. But other than that, no worries. So this question is more about knowledge. Feel free to respond if you're happy.
Okay. Okay, like I'm understanding the question. Indigenous peoples have always had this knowledge that we have been giving from generation to generation, like orally and with our ways of like telling stories. In the Sami, we have a way of singing yoik, where you can like tell stories and remember persons, remember places, and so on. So I think one way today is maybe, of course, it's more with the digital techniques that you can have more of that and do this like projects where you can like transmit the knowledge. And I will say that one of our ways of doing it is to like combine with the if I take this food system with like the food lab, to be able to lift up the knowledge in a more like innovative way that can like reach out to the national and international audience, like here in Rome with this kind of forum. I would say.
Yeah, so for your question, I think it's really important to with the circumstances that's happening, and for our people, Indigenous people, to pass on the knowledge from generation to generation, and also how we can adapt these knowledges and practices into today's circumstances, is because it is our identity. Way before, like, we have stories, that is our knowledge is our first education. So I think why we need to, our people or my tribe need to really pass on that knowledge of working with the nature is important, because it is our way of life. And at the moment, like, our people are adapting into the impacts of climate change, where we use our traditional knowledge in bridging the gap between science and our traditional knowledge. We come up with, if you check the Fan Kirab page, it's a local NGO in Vanuatu. They work with communities where people shared the traditional knowledge, and they came up with this prediction app, where following or looking at nature. And so one of the examples that I can give is, before the cyclone comes, this app will let people know, okay, you can look at the nature and you can tell, okay, there's a storm coming. So when we go out, the breadfruit tree. So if we see the breadfruit tree and there's lots and lots of flowers and lots of trees, it's telling us that there will be a cyclone. And so it's our first education or like a knowledge, where it's very important to us to really keep that in our family and for the next generation to come, so that we don't lose these knowledges that is very important to us. So I think, I hope my point is clear of why it's very important that we keep this knowledges, these traditions, because it's going to help us adapt into climate change or whatever circumstances, and also to keep us being resilient.
Okay.
So I think.
Thank you, Lisa. So we still have 5 minutes, and there's a couple interesting questions coming from the chat, but I also see that there's some in the room. So let's try to keep them a bit shorter now, just so that we can try to manage each and every one. So please go ahead.
Yes, I am an agriculture teacher educator, and I am fascinated and curious about how you have connected potentially with the school systems or with future or current teachers to integrate and share the Indigenous knowledge and some of the wonderful things that you shared today.
I think teachers play a big role. I think they're essential to partnering with as Indigenous peoples, we're piloting a lot of programs that could spread awareness or teach Indigenous ways of farming. And I think teachers are just in a capacity to take that on. And they're open, and it's all about education. And I know teachers just want to create different ways to create that space. And so for me, that's actually where I start a lot, and that's where I reach out a lot. And that's why I am a teacher as well, because there's lots of resources there to be flexible and adaptable that I don't find other places. So I would just say that. I don't know.
That's not out of time. If I can jump to the next question, but if you have something that you would like to add, I don't want to cut up.
No, but just that teachers are so important for the future generations, that you're teaching them and in Sweden, aren't teaching anything about the indigenous peoples or the Sami people. So what you're doing is really important because, you're teaching the new generation who's going to be the decision makers and handling our issues.
Okay, thank you. So is there someone else in the room, or maybe we can go to the ones from the chat? Okay, we're just gonna jump to one in the chat. Okay. Too many questions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Logoya. I work here in FAO. My question is to all the panelists. What are your feelings about bringing this indigenous knowledge to the mainstream to tackle issues with nutrition? We spoke about the health impact of processed food and so on. So some of the practices of the indigenous peoples on nutrition and food systems. How would you feel if you bring this knowledge to the mainstream for the urban poor and so on?
I feel very like it's needed and it needs to happen, but we also need the space created for that to happen. I also believe that there are a certain community members within community that know biodiversity, that know traditional values and beliefs, and they're the ones that need to bring that to the main stage, but they're often not active in these spaces and places. They're often the ones in community, deep in community, and they hold that knowledge because they don't need to go anywhere else. They're embedded in that, and we need those people to come and to be on these main stages because they truly embed that knowledge. Today, we have a lot of indigenous who don't have that connection, but are indigenous, but often get taken to these spaces and are often put on pressure to represent the indigenous communities while not having that connection to biodiversity. That's something I would definitely caution on that question.
Thank you for that response. And we're going to take one question online so that we're also including participants who are attending online. This is from Eric Rukbisha from Rwanda. And he's saying that one of the challenges that he observes back in Rwanda is that they're trying to adapt new varieties of crops to make them disease resistant. And he's wondering if there's a risk for indigenous and nutrition food crops and the risk also to lose these genetic and more traditional resources. That relates a lot to biodiversity.
I think for sure that there is a risk and there always will be a risk. I think that's why in the last question with that passage of intergenerational knowledge is so important because they have been in those situations before and they have the knowledge to tackle that challenge in a certain way, but also have the knowledge to be able to blend, traditional knowledge with other forms of traditional knowledge to be able to be in a position where your community is safe. And that's what it's all about is surviving and being safe. And I think when it comes to farming, there's so much new technology that comes about that sometimes, we say that I have a lot of horses at home and a lot of this hay or farming crops that they eat, sometimes the processed ones are not good for a horse's microbiome. And it's often the traditional that's not touched is a lot more richer. And therefore I look at that kind of question in that sense where we don't want to cover too much, which I think would create spaces for, potential diseases in crops or invasive species to then come in. That's a good question. That's all I can do to answer that one.
All right, so thank you. Sadly, I see there are still some questions, but we're gonna have to close the floor in order to jump to our closing remarks coming from Ocean Gill, the lead of the education track in the Work for Chrome. Thank you, Ocean, for finding the time, and we're curious to hear your closing remarks.
Thanks a lot, Erica. Thank you very much. In Irish, it was really fascinating to hear all of your thoughts. In Irish, there's a saying, Tirgan Changa, Tirgan Anam, which is a country without a language is a country without a soul. So it was really interesting to hear your thoughts, Lisa, on preserving your traditional languages and how that connects throughout generations and then with generations today and how important that is. But what I heard across all all your points today was this connection to place, and how that is so important to your language, to your communities. And Daryl, yeah, from yourself, when you reintroduced buffaloes into the communities as the spirit returning to those communities. So it's really, thank you for sharing those thoughts as well. Thanks a lot, Sarah. But yeah, when we look at education and education for sustainable development, education for climate change is sort of my background. One of the main drivers and motivators to act is connection to nature, connection to the land. And this is not new. This is, you know, something that we've known for a long, long time. And yesterday we heard from, in one of our events when we were sharing agri-food systems education projects, one of our representatives, FAO, had mentioned that, you know, we need to now move, you know, our agri-food systems education from the classroom into the fields, onto the land, you know. So we need to reintroduce this connection to the environment as we expand our urban areas and our peri-urban areas. It's something that yeah, needs to continue to grow. So thank you for sharing and sharing that strongly. It's really appreciated. And we hope to continue to do that as well, across all of our work within the World Food Forum, within the education program, as we connect closer to communities through our national chapters as well. It's something that we really intend on doing. It's not just this top-down approach, but it's coming from local communities. And it's great to hear these thoughts here in all of these discussions and these events, but it really has to translate to the local communities. And thank you for sharing all of that work that you're doing. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Oisin. Thank you, everyone. So yes, thank you so much to our speakers for sharing everything with us, and for our audience for joining. It was a pleasure to have you, and with your interesting questions. Again, sorry we couldn't cover everything. And yes, I hope you keep enjoying the World Food Forum and its next events.